The phone call came at 6 in the morning, a shrill, unwelcome bird of prey slicing through the quiet peace of my sister's guest room. For a blissful week, I had been away from my apartment, away from the city, breathing in the scent of Eleanor's garden and pretending, for a little while, that I was just a woman on a holiday. The pretense shattered with the first ring. My heart, which had been beating to the slow, steady rhythm of country life, instantly lurched into the frantic, panic tempo of a cornered animal. I knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a river stone, that this was it. The endgame had begun. On the other end of the line was Ricardo, the young, earnest security guard from my building. His voice was tight with professional concern, but I could hear the undercurrent of personal alarm. "Mildred? I am so sorry to wake you, but there is a situation here. Your daughter-in-law, Deborah, is in the lobby. She says she's the new owner of your apartment." He paused, and the silence on the line felt heavy, freighted with his disbelief. "She has a locksmith with her. She's demanding I let her up. She's saying you're no longer competent to live there." I sat up in bed, the floral quilt pooling around my waist. The morning light was just beginning to filter through the curtains, painting the room in soft shades of gray and rose. It was a peaceful scene, a world away from the ugly drama unfolding miles away in a sterile apartment lobby. A year ago, this call would have sent me into a spiral of tears and terror. My hands would have shaken, my voice would have been a choked whisper. But the woman who had existed a year ago was gone, burned away by a slow, simmering fire of betrayal, leaving behind something harder, something forged. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air cool in my lungs. "And what did you tell her, Ricardo?" "I told her that you are on a registered vacation and that no one is permitted access without your direct authorization," he said, his voice firming up, reassured by my calm. "She's not happy. She's making threats, Mildred. She said if I don't let her up, she'll call the police and tell them you're committing elder abuse. Against your own son." The words, meant to be a nuclear bomb, landed with a dull thud. Elder abuse. The accusation was so vile, so patently absurd, that it almost looped back around to being comical. Me abusing Walter? My sweet, gentle Walter, the anchor of my life, the keeper of my heart since the day he was born. The world saw him as disabled, a man of 40 trapped in a body and mind that did not obey the usual commands. But I saw him as my son. He was the soft humming that filled our apartment, the simple, profound joy in a shared bowl of ice cream, the warmth of his hand in mine as we watched old movies. The thought of anyone, let alone the viper married to my other son, using Walter as a weapon against me, it did not ignite fresh rage. It simply solidified the cold, dense core of resolve that had been forming in my gut for months. "Don't worry, Ricardo," I said, and I was surprised by the smoothness of my own voice. It sounded like someone else, someone far stronger than I had ever believed myself to be. "You did the right thing. Do not let her go anywhere. I'm on my way. It will take me about an hour." I allowed a small, thin smile to touch my lips, a smile that only I could feel. "There's a surprise waiting for her. She's not going to like it." Hanging up the phone, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. The woman staring back was 71 years old. Her hair was a soft, snowy white, her face a roadmap of a life lived with love, grief, and a quiet, persistent duty. But her eyes were new. They were not the soft, pleading eyes of the woman who had spent decades trying to please everyone, walking on eggshells around her son Mark and his grasping wife. They were the eyes of a general on the morning of a battle she had already meticulously planned and won. I had spent a lifetime being the gentle matriarch, the selfless provider, the emotional cushion for my family's many failings. That life was over. Deborah was about to find out, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that she had pushed the wrong old woman too far. My life with Robert, my late husband, had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet partnership. We weren't a couple prone to grand gestures. Our love was in the daily things. The way he always made me the first cup of coffee in the morning, the way I knew exactly how he liked his toast. We bought the apartment 45 years ago, our first and only home. It was a grand, sun-drenched space on the 7th floor, with large windows that looked out over a canopy of ancient oak trees. For us it was a palace. We filled it with books, with music, with the smell of baking bread, and eventually with the laughter of our two sons, Mark and Walter. It was our sanctuary, the physical manifestation of our shared life. Robert always used to say, "This place is our fortress, Millie. No matter what happens out there, we're safe in here." Walter was born with a light in his eyes and a challenge in his wiring. The doctors gave us a string of sterile diagnoses, a lexicon of limitations. But Robert and I saw only our son. We learned his language, which was one of touch, of music, of routine. His needs were complex, but his soul was simple and pure. He was our joy. Mark, our elder son, was different. He was healthy, bright, and blessed with all the opportunities Walter would never have. And yet, from a young age, a shadow of resentment clung to him. He loved his brother, I think, but he resented the attention Walter required. He saw our focused care not as necessity, but as preference. This small, bitter seed of entitlement, I now realize, was something we should have addressed, but we were so consumed with managing Walter's world that we let Mark's grievances fester. And then Mark brought home Deborah. From the moment she walked into our apartment, I felt a shift in the air, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. She was all dazzling smiles and saccharine compliments, her words like honey-coated thorns. "Oh, Mildred, this apartment is just lovely. So much character. A bit old-fashioned, of course, but it has good bones." The subtext was always there, hanging in the air. "This place is a relic, and so are you. It's time for a change." She sized up our home not as a place of love and memory, but as a real estate asset. She looked at me not as her husband's mother, but as an obstacle. After Robert passed away 10 years ago, the dynamic grew sharper, more predatory. The grief was a physical weight, a cloak I couldn't shrug off. My world had shrunk to the walls of the apartment and the needs of Walter. Mark and Deborah, instead of offering support, saw an opportunity. Their visits became less about family and more about reconnaissance. Deborah would glide through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the furniture, her eyes calculating square footage. "You must be so lonely here, Mildred," she would coo, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "All this space for just you and Walter. It must be such a burden to keep up." The requests for money started subtly. A short-term loan to cover a car repair. Help with a down payment on a house they never seemed to actually buy. Mark would make the call, his voice laced with a practiced, boyish shame, but I knew the words were Deborah's. "Dad would have wanted to help us, Mom. You know he would have." They weaponized my love for my husband, using his memory as a crowbar to pry open my savings. And I, lost in my fog of sorrow and desperate to maintain a connection to my only other son, always said yes. I wrote the checks, transferred the funds, telling myself it was what Robert would have done. I was a provider. It was my role. But my generosity was not seen as love. It was interpreted as weakness. A well that would never run dry. The turning point, the moment the fog finally began to clear, came about 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday. They had invited themselves over for dinner, a rare occurrence that always set my nerves on edge. Walter, who was incredibly sensitive to emotional currents, grew agitated whenever they were near. He would retreat into himself, humming loudly to block out the tension. That night, Deborah was practically vibrating with a barely contained excitement. She and Mark presented me with a glossy brochure for what they called a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. It was a boutique catering company. They needed $50,000 for startup capital. "Think of it, Mildred," Deborah said, her eyes gleaming. "This isn't a loan. This is an investment. We'll make you a partner. You'll be helping to secure our future. Your grandson's future." They had a son, little Joshua, whom they trotted out emotionally whenever they needed maximum leverage. I looked at the brochure. It was filled with pictures of smiling, attractive people clinking champagne glasses. It looked less like a business plan and more like a vacation advertisement. I felt a familiar weariness settle over me. $50,000 is a lot of money, Deborah," I said softly. Her smile tightened, the sweetness curdling at the edges. "It's for family, Mildred. Robert would have understood. He always believed in providing for his children. There it was again. Robert's ghost, conscripted into her service. Mark sat beside her, staring at his hands, a puppet in his own wife's theater. "I need to think about it," I said. Deborah's face fell, and for a split second, the mask of civility slipped. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in her eyes. It was ugly and reptilian. "Think about what?" she snapped, her voice suddenly hard as flint. "It's just sitting in your bank account. What else are you going to use it for? You and Walter don't exactly have an active social life." The cruelty of it, the casual, dismissive swipe at my life, at Walter's life, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to intervene, to say something, anything. He just shifted uncomfortably in his chair and mumbled, "Debbie, come on. I didn't give them the money." I made excuses, I prevaricated, but for the first time I held firm. Their calls became more frequent, more demanding, then colder, and finally, they stopped altogether. A week later, I saw a picture on Deborah's social media page. She and Mark were in Italy raising glasses of Prosecco on a sun-drenched terrace. The caption read, "Living our best life. #hard work pays off." The catering business had been a lie. They wanted my money for a luxury vacation. They had been prepared to drain my savings, the money Robert and I had carefully accumulated for my and Walter's security, for a 2-week European holiday. That night, I sat in Robert's armchair in the dark, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a bomb. For the first time, I didn't cry. The sadness that had been my constant companion for a decade was gone. In its place, a different feeling was crystallizing. It was cold, heavy, and immensely powerful. It was rage, but not a hot, explosive rage. It was a glacial anger, slow-moving and unstoppable, carving new pathways through the landscape of my heart. I looked at the photograph of Robert on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes smiling at me. "Our fortress, Millie," he had said, and in that moment I understood. A fortress isn't just a place of comfort. It's a place of defense. And I had left the gates wide open for the barbarians to wander in and out as they pleased. How could I have been so blind? The question echoed in the quiet room. I had allowed my grief and my desperate need for family to obscure the truth that had been right in front of me. Deborah did not see me as a mother-in-law. She saw me as a resource to be depleted. Mark, my own son, was too weak or too complicit to stop her. They weren't family. They were predators. And they were circling, waiting for me to weaken, waiting for me to die, so they could pick the bones of my life clean. A switch flipped inside me. The victim, the grieving widow, the pushover, she died in that armchair. In her place, a strategist was born. The next morning, I called my sister. Eleanor was 2 years my junior. A retired accountancy hoe had been widowed young, and had navigated the world with a pragmatism I had always admired. She had watched my dynamic with Mark and Deborah for years, her disapproval a silent, steady presence. I told her everything. The constant loans, the condescending remarks, the lie about the catering business, and the final ugly demand. I didn't cry. I laid out the Faxbiliscaya legal brief. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Eleanor's voice, clear and sharp as a bell. "It's about time, Millie," she said. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years. That woman is a piranha, and she's taught your son to be one too. You have to protect yourself. You have to protect Walter. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to build a wall," I said, the words surprising me with their force. "A wall so high and so strong they'll never be able to climb it." "Good," Eleanor said. "The first brick in that wall is a lawyer. A very, very good one." And she gave me a name, Mr. Davison. He was a specialist in estate planning and elder law, known for being as compassionate as he was ruthless. Making the appointment was the first concrete action I had taken in my own defense in my entire life. It felt terrifying and exhilarating. I gathered every financial statement, every deed, every will and trust document Robert and I had ever signed. I even went through my old checkbook registers, highlighting every single transfer to Mark and Deborah. The total was staggering, a monument to my own naivety. Mr. Davison's office was in a tall glass building downtown. It was a world away from my cozy, lived-in apartment. It was a place of steel and leather and quiet, immense power. He was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that saw everything. He listened patiently as I recounted my story, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He examined the documents I brought, his fingers tracing the lines of text, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mildred," he began, his voice calm and measured, "you are in a precarious position but not an unsalvageable one. Your daughter-in-law's behavior is, frankly, textbook financial elder abuse. The problem is, you've willingly given them the money. Proving coercion after the fact is difficult." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I said proving past coercion is difficult. Protecting you from future coercion, however, is another matter entirely. We need to make you legally bulletproof." He picked up the deed to my apartment and Robert's will. "Your husband was a very wise man," he murmured, reading a clause. "He set up this apartment's ownership in a survivorship deed, but he also included language in his will establishing a testamentary trust for Walter's care, with the apartment intended as its primary asset upon your passing. It's a bit convoluted, but it shows his intent. His priority was always Walter, the hidden advantage. Robert, my practical, forward-thinking Robert, had left me a weapon and I hadn't even known it. His love was still protecting me, even from beyond the grave. What does that mean for me now?" I asked. "It means we have a strong moral and legal foundation to build on," Mr. Davison explained. "We are going to create an irrevocable living trust. You will be the primary trustee, and your sister Eleanor will be the successor trustee. The trust will become the legal owner of this apartment and your other significant assets. You will retain full control and use of everything for your lifetime, but the assets themselves will be owned by the trust. Its stated, unchangeable purpose will be to provide for the lifelong care and housing of your son Walter. After that, any remainder can be distributed. But Walter's care comes first." "Absolutely," he let that sink in. "Once this is done," he continued, "your son and daughter-in-law will have no legal claim. They cannot force you to sell. They cannot inherit the apartment directly. They cannot touch a single penny of the capital. It will be ironclad." The relief was so profound it was almost painful. It felt like a great crushing weight was being lifted from my chest, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying. "And what about them? What will they do when they find out?" Mr. Davison's smile became a little wider. "That, Mildred, is where the strategy comes in. We are not going to tell them. We are going to let them make a move. We are going to let them overplay their hand. Entitled people are predictable. When they don't get what they want through manipulation, they escalate to aggression, and so the plan was born. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly with Mr. Davison. We drafted the trust. We transferred the deed. We updated my will and my power of attorney, naming Eleanor as my agent. Every signature felt like a brick being laid in my new wall. I also took another step. I had a state-of-the-art security system installed in my apartment, complete with cameras in the common areas and a direct line to the front desk. I told the building management that I was growing more forgetful in my old age and wanted extra peace of mind. The final piece of the puzzle was the lure. Called Mark. I hadn't spoken to him in months. My voice was intentionally frail, wavering. I told him I was feeling tired, that I was going away for a week to my sister's house to rest and get my affairs in order. I let the words hang in the air, knowing exactly how Deborah would interpret them. Getting her affairs in order. To her, that could only mean one thing: capitulation. Preparing to move to a nursing home. Preparing to sign everything over. I was baiting the trap with their own greed. "Oh, Mom, that's a good idea," Mark said, his voice slick with manufactured concern. "You deserve a rest. Don't worry about a thing. We'll keep an eye on things from here." I knew what that meant. They would be watching the apartment, waiting for their moment. The week at Eleanor's was a strange limbo. I was safe, I was prepared, but I was living in the tense, quiet moments before a storm. We drank tea, we did crossword puzzles, we talked about everything except the sword of Damocles I had so carefully hung. And then, at 6 in the morning on the 5th day, the phone rang. The drive back to the city was surreal. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. The sun was rising, casting long, dramatic shadows across the highway. I was not afraid. I felt a strange, cold clarity, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the architect of it. I was driving toward a confrontation, but it didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a final, necessary act of housekeeping. I was about to clean my house. When we pulled up to the building, Ricardo met us at the curb, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "They're still in the lobby, Mildred. The locksmith left, but she refuses to leave. Your son is with her now. They've been loud." "Thank you, Ricardo. You've been a great help," I said, patting his arm. Eleanor and I walked into the lobby, and the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. Deborah was pacing like a caged panther, her face blotchy with rage. Mark was slumped in a chair, staring at the floor, the very picture of a man who had abdicated his soul. Deborah spotted me, and her face transformed. The anger was instantly replaced by a predatory smile. "Mildred, there you are. I was so worried. We came to check on the apartment, and the guard wouldn't let us in." She came toward me, her arms outstretched for a hug I had no intention of accepting. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Hello, Deborah." Mark, my voice was even devoid of emotion. Her smile faltered. "We need to talk, Mildred. This has gone on long enough. We've been speaking with some people, experts, and they agree that this big apartment is just too much for you. And frankly, we're concerned about Walter. It's time for you to let us take over. We're the new owners. It's for the best." "The new owners," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Is that so?" "Yes," she said, her confidence returning. She gestured vaguely around the lobby. "This is our property now. We have papers. And if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to take legal action. I've already been advised to report you for elder abuse and neglect. Keeping Walter cooped up in that apartment, it's not right. A judge will see it our way." The threat, so monstrous and final, was her last card. She played it with a flourish, expecting me to crumble. My son Mark finally looked up, his face pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was a coward, and in that moment, I felt not anger toward him, but a profound and sorrowful pity. He had traded his mother and his brother for this venomous woman, and he would one day realize the poverty of that bargain. I looked directly at Deborah, into her cold, calculating eyes. And I smiled. It was not my old gentle smile. It was the smile of the woman in the mirror, the general who had already won. "You know, Deborah," I said, my voice as soft as silk, "you've gone to a lot of trouble. The least I can do is let you come upstairs." Her face flooded with triumph. She thought she had won. She shot a smug, victorious look at Ricardo, who was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "Thank you, Mildred. I knew you'd see reason, Eleanor, and I rode up in the elevator with them." The silence was thick with Deborah's gloating and Mark's misery. I felt nothing but a clean, cold calm. I unlocked the door to my home, my fortress. The air inside was still and smelled of lemon polish and old books. It smelled like home. Walter was in his room, listening to his classical music, safe and oblivious. On the coffee table in the center of the room was a single, thick navy blue folder. Deborah strode into the room as if she owned it, which in her mind she now did. "All right, Mildred. We'll make this quick. We've arranged for a lovely room for you at the Silver Pines residence. And we've found a special group home for Walter. You can pack a few personal things." "Deborah," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her monologue. I pointed to the folder on the table. "Before you start measuring for new curtains, I think you should read this." She looked at the folder, then at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. She snatched it up and opened it. Mark came to stand behind her, peering over her shoulder. The first page was a letter from Mr. Davison's law firm, formally introducing the enclosed documents. The second was a copy of the newly recorded deed, transferring ownership of apartment 7B from Mildred Jennings to the Walter Jennings Irrevocable Trust. The third was a summary of the trust itself, outlining its sole purpose: the lifetime care and housing of Walter Jennings, under the full and exclusive control of the trustee Mildred Jennings and her successor Eleanor Gable. It explicitly stated that the assets of the trust could not be sold, leveraged, or distributed for any other purpose during Walter's lifetime. I watched her face as she read. It was a fascinating theatrical performance. The initial smug confidence slowly drained away, replaced by a confused furrowing of her brow. Then came dawning comprehension, her eyes widening in disbelief. Finally, the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a ghastly mottled white. The legal, ironclad finality of the words on the page was a poison she was being forced to drink. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The documents trembled in her hand. "What is this? This is illegal. You can't do this." "Oh, it's perfectly legal, I assure you," I said, my voice still gentle. "Mr. Davison is very, very good at his job. The apartment, my savings, everything is in the trust. It is no longer mine to give away or to be taken. It belongs to Walter's future. A future that I and only I will manage. But the inheritance," she sputtered, the mask completely gone, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. "Mark is your son. It's his birthright. Mark gave up his birthright every time he let you use him to ask me for money," I said, finally turning my gaze to my son. His face was a mask of horror and shame. He finally understood. A son doesn't stand by while his mother is threatened. A brother doesn't use his disabled sibling as a pawn in a game of extortion. Deborah threw the folder onto the floor, the papers scattering. "You old witch!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly thing. "You think you've won? I'll still call the authorities. I'll tell them you're crazy. I'll tell them you're abusing him. I'll drag your name through the mud." And that is when Eleanor, who had been standing silently by the door, spoke for the first time. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said, her voice like ice. She held up her phone. "This entire conversation, from the moment we stepped into the lobby, has been recording. The threats you made to Ricardo, your claims of ownership, your plan to report a fictitious crime to the police. I wonder what a judge would think of that." The last vestiges of Deborah's fight collapsed. She stared at the phone, then at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. She had been outmaneuvered, outplanned, and utterly, completely defeated. She had come here this morning as a conqueror, and now she was nothing. A common thief caught with her hand in a till she couldn't open. She grabbed Mark's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Let's go," she hissed. He stumbled after her, not once looking at me. They fled my apartment, my home, like the vermin they were. I walked to the door and closed it softly behind them. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. In the sudden, complete silence, I stood in the middle of my living room. The scattered papers on the floor were the only evidence of the battle that had just been won. Eleanor came and put her arm around my shoulders. "It's over, Millie," she said softly. From his room, I could hear the soaring, triumphant notes of a Mozart symphony. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in 10 years, it felt like I could actually fill my lungs. The weight was gone. The fear was gone. The suffocating sense of obligation was gone. I was not a fortress under siege. I was just a woman in her own home. Free. The days and weeks that followed were a quiet rebirth. I never heard from Mark or Deborah again. I suspect the threat of Eleanor's recording, and the potential for a countersuit for harassment and attempted fraud, was enough to ensure their permanent silence. The new life I built was not dramatic or flashy. It was small and it was mine. I had the locks changed, a symbolic act that brought me immense satisfaction. I donated the furniture they had always criticized to a local charity. I filled the empty spaces with vibrant new plants and books I had always meant to read. Walter and I found a new rhythm. We started volunteering at the local animal shelter twice a week. He had a preternatural gift for calming the most anxious dogs, his quiet humming a balm to their frightened souls. Seeing him find a purpose outside the walls of our home, seeing him smile as a grateful puppy licked his face, was a gift greater than any amount of money. I reconnected with old friends, women I had drifted away from during the long winter of my grief. We had coffee, we went to museums, we talked for hours. I discovered that I was still interesting, that I still had opinions, that I still had a life to live. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit in Robert's armchair, which I kept, and I think about a woman who let herself be diminished, who equated self-sacrifice with love. I feel a certain pity for her, but I do not miss her. The woman I am now understands that true love, for your children and for yourself, is not about giving until you are an empty shell. It is about protecting what is precious. It is about building walls when you need to, not to keep the world out, but to keep your own soul safe. My victory wasn't in defeating Deborah. It was in reclaiming myself. I didn't become a different person. I simply shed the skin of the person everyone else expected me to be, and finally, at 71 years old, stepped into the shoes of the woman I was always meant to be. Strong, dignified, and free. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? How do you draw the line between family loyalty and self-preservation? I'm genuinely interested to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where in the world you are listening to my story from. It warms my heart to know how far these words can travel. Like the video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to light. And there are many other stories waiting for you. If my journey resonated with you, consider using the Super Thanks feature to support my work directly. It means the world to me. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.